Let's talk for about 15 minutes, I think, on school development and just give some context. Sometimes you may have a question but feel it's inappropriate to ask about investment within school, year group sizes, all of the things that perhaps we wouldn't necessarily put out in a circular, but is appropriate to put in context to the audience this time. So I don't want to talk, some of this I ticked off a few months ago, but I think it is really noteworthy, and you can't help but hear the news about some of these for any business. If you are a business owner, you'll be very much aware of what was an unprecedented national insurance increase along with national minimum wage. Even if you're not a business owner, you'll have heard a lot of independent school news. The ISC, which is the overarching body for the majority of independent schools, they voted a couple of weeks ago to take legal action against the VAT increase. I know it was a split decision because there's a whole politics behind this, and it would actually only impact a very small minority of pupils because it's working through a piece of EU legislation about equality. So just to give you some context, it's a very specific point off here. If you, for example, were from a religious minority group, say a Jewish family, and you went to a local Jewish school and there were no other Jewish schools around, and that particular school was at threat of closure, that piece of European legislation about your human rights is where it would impact. It is not going to be a piece of legislation which is widely applicable. And actually, whether that is win or lose, the government can do what it wants. It's not binding in the sense that the government has to go with any decision. It might lose a little bit of face, but it would lose more face if it suddenly dropped the policy altogether. So it will happen in January, and schools will close, schools are closing, and there will be a change of the marketplace. And a change in the marketplace, for those of you who are particularly interested in that side of things, will be more proprietorial owned schools, the loss of prep schools, the loss of charitable trust schools, and the amalgamation of some schools into bigger ones or groups of schools. That's the marketplace, and that's increasing. And people project it may be as much as between 60 to 80% private owned schools, of which we would be included in as proprietorial, we're no longer charitable trust. So about aggressive competitors, there's, again, this is purely a sharing of information rather than any opinion. Schools in our local catchment are far more aggressive in terms of their advertising, in terms of, for example, if you search for Heathfield Mill School, you're going to do it now, aren't you? But if you search for Heathfield Mill School, it may not necessarily be the Heathfield Mill School that comes up. It'll be a sponsored advert. And the marketplace, because there's a shrinkage in numbers, particularly in the primary years, but actually across the sector, there's about 10,000 pupils, I believe, to have not started or left since September in the independent sector. It's a very competitive market, but more so than it ever was. So I think that's worth sharing. Is more point of interest really. We're doing an Ofsted inspection for our nursery any time now. That's in the next 2 or 3 months, but for under 2s only. It's a very specific piece of legislation. And we do an ISI inspection within 12 months. They're about 2 to 3 weeks ahead, and we were inspected in September of 2 years ago. So we're due September of 2025, if not a bit before. So there are challenges, but with all this, I just want to very sort of quickly summarise what we're doing, particularly about the financial challenges and where we're positioning ourselves. We're absorbing some of the increase, not as much as I would want to, but it's partly about affordability. I know, and this is, again, just a sharing of information, and there's already a quite significant gap between our fees and some of our competitors' fees. And part of our market strategy is to position ourselves as affordable. Nothing's free in this world, and we have salaries to pay, and we want to invest in the school and our staff. But we're trying very hard to hold a line when it comes to increases. And I think what we might see is that gap widen further, I think. We're looking at circa, if you take in lunches into account, you're looking circa £20,000 in some schools as a day pupil for what would be a lot of money for 1 year's worth of education. Our top end with 15,000 and something. So there's a significant gap, and I think that will probably grow as we try to hold that line. And we can, because we're quite mobile in terms of the age range and also the manoeuvrability of how we sit as a school in terms of class sizes and options and offers. We haven't got big overheads that some schools might have. So specifically I want to talk about 5 things, because that other stuff's quite doom and gloom, but I wanted to share something about how we're responding to some of those challenges. So when we get to a point where we can announce these, you can have a bit of context where that has come from. And I always believe in being very honest with people. So whilst things might change, in my head right at this moment in time with our financial planning, this is very much hot off the press. So nursery, there's a mixed message here. On the one hand, there's a drop in birth rate. Any school, state, independent, is struggling with their reception intake. Schools are closing, state schools are thinking about their staffing costs. TAs, for example, are being made redundant. However, very specifically, in contrast to that, the sufficiency of funded provision for under twos is in our immediate area. Here's the school, and the light yellow is insufficient places for demand. There's a shortage of places. So this is from September 24, and actually if you've looked at good quality nursery places, there's a bigger gap still. So it's slightly less for over twos, it's sort of there or thereabouts, but certainly for under twos. And part of the reason for that is that the requirements for under twos in terms of the registration, it's an Ofsted registration, for example, in the first instance, it's very specific. So it's not uncommon for nurseries not, or indeed childminders, not to have under twos because the legislation is quite different. And that's why there's a bit of a mismatch. So only today actually I had somebody come across with some furniture quotes. Our nursery generally is having decimals. We did an expansion. However, we're restricted by the rooms, and if we're honest, the furniture is a bit inherited and isn't consistent. So the plan and the intention is to make use of the unused spaces in Cedar, which is our building, which is 13 years old, 2011, and to put some high quality furniture and increase that, with also the secondary hope that we tackle that reception intake, because we know when children start, we retain them really well. And it's a fact, we can look at the data, we are very good at retention, but sometimes people look at the affordability on paper and it's one of those choices. It's easier, I think, if people are in situ. We have the Haven currently, now you may not know about this because it's in the main house, but it's well used by all our pupils. It's a well-being space, we do interventions, we use it for exam spaces. It's not that accessible, partly because the stairs are quite steep, and also the layout of the room, it's long, more like 2 classrooms than it is sort of a coming together space. I hope you can follow the plan view. This is the preschool that's been vacated because we made a decision for this September to move it into Cedar. Actually gone really well, we're very happy. I think parents, are happy with the move. It's a better space. It works very well with reception in terms of the whole early years building. Nursery, ultimately this will become an early years building, but year 1 and 2, we're remain there, at least in the short term. This is over the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. We're not suddenly going to change this overnight. The Haven's currently here in this building. It's going to move to preschool. You know this building because it's the park adjacent to it. And this rather horrible building, which probably we could auction off with the more stronger of those, or maybe less strong. You want to take out a little bit of your upsets with everything that comes this time of year. You can get a sledgehammer and knock it down. I think it would probably fall over by itself. It really does need demolition. So that's going in January, so early New Year. You'll see that go. And this space has already been converted for the Haven to move across. It's central to the school. There's a quite big footprint in terms of the outdoor space, so a space where the children can come in of all ages. It's obviously single story, so it's accessible to the younger ones as well as the older ones. And in terms of its location, it's a nice place. It's quite a hub for who we are as a school. You all know the school, you're all existing parents, but it's what we do. That's quite exciting. We're rapidly moving on. The school building itself, as a main house, is underused. Not for any design particularly, but it's underused as a space for pupils to be in with a lot of admin. By moving the Haven out, we want to move the department in to actually get more footfall in the main house. So it becomes a bit more of a school and has that. There's children use it downstairs, but they only really go upstairs for science. And we want to make the hubble of the school actually in that main house as well and bring some of those classes upstairs. That's what will happen to allow fellows to be entered. I hope you're following the plan. I'll try and summarise in a minute. The sixth form, we'd already committed a spend to increasing capacity. And you may have seen these drawings, small tutorial rooms, because that's how the sixth form works, of 3. Actually, we really need 6 because we've got timetable blocks because the numbers are larger than we thought. So rather than building this separately, we'll be building on the end of Fellows, which is the building below the one that is the furthest building our site. It's the one below Douglas, which just had the refurbishment, so if you don't know where I'm looking. And what that means is we get some purpose-built spaces for the sixth form. Actually, we've talked today, things like exams, where we've got maybe smaller classes or smaller tuition spaces across the school, we can make use of this. And the rest of Fellows, we'll move some classes to the main house. That then allows that to be freed up for that refurbishment to take place, which we've just been looking at the timeline, and it will start around Easter time with a view to getting that finished by December. But all these pieces sort of involve a flow of people from one space to the next. So to summarise, I hope you make some sense of this. You're here. We've done this building. The tutorial spaces come the end of Fellows, and then this building will be completed. We want to develop the pond. We have a super space, and the whole engagement with the outside space is something we're working on as a school. So there'll be some relationship between this space, the end classroom, and the pond, decking or some sort of interaction, so we make more use of that. We already have an emerging sixth form garden at the back, so we're thinking about bringing in the bottom of the site to the pond in this area, and then ultimately there's a pathway which goes up here to Cedar, so we're connecting some of these spaces. And from an architectural point of view, some symmetry, so that the wood finish that is on this building, that building connect the edge of the dining room, it starts to pull together into a bit of a campus rather than older buildings which maybe fit for purpose but don't necessarily, they're not necessarily being used as we would like them to for their functionality. Almost at 20 past, I've talked about the nice stuff. This is funded on the basis of the plan that basically was shared with you a few months ago. So what you need to take away with this is there are challenges, and I've been very direct about those, but we have a plan which involves not standing still, but involves responding to those challenges at the top end of the school with the sixth form, at the bottom end of the school with the nursery, and actually in between thinking about the refurbishment of our space and classrooms. Clearly there's lots goes on in the school. I'm just focusing on the buildings, that's the visible, but I want you to take away that when you hear some of the doom and gloom in the media, there's a narrative, a working narrative that is here at the school that is costed and improved. All of this has gone to board level, and that we're just working through the timeline in terms of what happens next.